The Frog King or Iron Henry, a fairy tale by Brothers Grimm. In olden times, when wishing still helped one, there lived a king whose daughters were all beautiful, but the youngest was so beautiful that the sun itself, which has seen so much, was astonished whenever it shone in her face. Close by the king's castle lay a great dark forest, and under an old lime tree in the forest was a well. And when the day was very warm, the king's child went out into the forest and sat down by the side of a cool fountain. And when she was bored, she took a golden ball and threw it up on a high and caught it. This ball was her favorite plaything. Now it so happened that on one occasion the princess's golden ball did not fall into the little hand which she was holding up for it, but onto the ground beyond and rolled straight into the water. The king's daughter followed it with her eyes, but it vanished. The well was deep, so deep that the bottom could not be seen. At this she began to cry and cried louder and louder, but could not be comforted. And as she thus lamented, someone said to her, "What ails you, king's daughter? You weep so that even a stone would show pity." She looked round to the side from whence the voice came, and saw a frog stretching forth its big ugly head from the water. "Ah, old water splasher, is it you?" she said. "I'm weeping from a golden ball which has fallen into the well." "Be quiet, do not weep," answered the frog. "I can help you, but what will you give me if I bring your plaything up again?" "Whatever you will have, dear frog," said she. "My clothes, my pearls, my jewels, and even the golden crown which I'm wearing." The frog answered, "I do not care for your clothes, your pearls, or your jewels, nor for your golden crown. But if you will love me and let me be your companion and playfellow, and sit by you at your little table and eat off your little golden plate and drink out of your golden little cup and sleep in your little bed, if you will promise me this, I will go down below and bring you your golden ball up again." "Oh yes," said she, "I promise you all you wish, if you will but bring me my ball back again." But she thought, "How the silly frog does talk. All he does is to sit in the water with other frogs and croak. He can be no companion to any human being." But the frog, when he had received this promise, put his head into the water and sank down, and in a short while came swimming up again with the ball in his mouth, and threw it on the grass. The king's daughter was delighted to see her pretty plaything once more and picked it up and ran away with it. "Wait, wait," said the frog. "Take me with you. I can't run as you can." But what did it avail him to scream his crook after her as loudly as he could? She did not listen to it, but ran home and soon forgot the poor frog, who was forced to go back into his well again. The next day, when she had seated herself at table with the king and all the courtiers, and was eating from a little golden plate, splish, splash, splish, splash, up the marble staircase, and when it had got to the top, it knocked at the door and cried, "Princess, youngest princess, open the door for me." She ran to see who was outside, but when she opened the door, there sat the frog in front of it. Then she slammed the door to in great haste, sat down to dinner again, and was quite frightened. The king saw plainly that her heart was beating violently and said, "My child, what are you so afraid of? Is there perchance a giant outside who wants to carry you away?" "Ah, no," replied she. "It is no giant, but a disgusting frog." "What does a frog want with you?" "Ah, dear father, yesterday as I was in the forest sitting by the well, playing, my golden ball fell into the water, and because I cried so, the frog brought it out again for me. And because he so insisted, I promised him he should be my companion, but I never thought he would be able to come out of his water. And now he's outside and wants to come in to me." In the meantime, it knocked a second time and cried, "Princess, youngest princess, open the door for me." Do you not know what you said to me yesterday by the cool waters of the well? Princess, youngest princess, open the door for me. Then the king said, that which you have promised must you perform. Go and let him in. She went and opened the door, and the frog hopped in and followed her, step by step, to her chair. There he sat and cried, lift me up beside you. She delayed until at last the king commanded her to do so. Once the frog was on the chair, he wanted to be on the table. And when he was on the table, he said, now, push your little golden plate near to me that we may eat together. She did this, but it was easy to see that she did not do it willingly. The frog enjoyed what he ate, but almost every mouthful she took choked her. At length he said, I have eaten and am satisfied. Now I'm tired. Carry me into your little room and make your little silken bed ready, and we will both lie down and go to sleep. The king's daughter began to cry, for she was afraid of the cold frog, which she did not like to touch, which now was to sleep in a pretty little clean bed. But the king grew angry and said, he who helped you when you were in trouble, out not afterwards to be despised by you. So she took hold of the frog with 2 fingers, carried him upstairs and put him in a corner. But when she was in bed, he crept to her and said, I'm tired. I want to sleep as well as you. Lift me up or I will tell your father. At this she was terribly angry and took him up and threw him with all her might against the wall. Now will you be quiet, odious frog, said she. But when he fell down, he was no frog, but a king's son with kind and beautiful eyes. He, by her father's will, was now her dear companion and husband. Then he told her how he had been bewitched by a wicked witch, and how no one could have delivered him from the well but herself, and that tomorrow they will go together into his kingdom. Then they went to sleep. Next morning, when the sun awoke them, a carriage came driving up with 8 white horses, which had white ostrich feathers on their heads, and were harnessed with golden chains. And behind stood the young king's servant, faithful Henry. Faithful Henry had been so unhappy when his master was changed into a frog that he had caused 3 iron bands to be laid around his heart, lest it could burst with grief and sadness. The carriage was to conduct the young king into his kingdom. Faithful Henry helped them both in and placed himself behind again, and was full of joy because of this deliverance. And when they had driven a part of the way with the king's son, the king's son heard a cracking behind him as if something was broken. So he turned round and cried, Henry, the carriage is breaking. No, master, it is not the carriage. It is a band from my heart, which was put there in my great pain when you were a frog imprisoned in the well. Again and once again they were on their way, something cracked, and each time the king's son thought the carriage was breaking, but it was only the bands which were springing from the heart of faithful Henry, because his master was set free and was happy. Hansel and Gretel, Fairy Tale by Brothers Grimm. Hard by a great forest dwelt a poor woodcutter with his wife and his 2 children. The boy was called Hansel and the girl Gretel. He had little to bite and break, and once when great death fell on the land, he could no longer procure even daily bread. Now when he thought over this, by night in his bed and tossed about in his anxiety, he groaned and said to his wife, what is to become of us? How are we to feed our poor children, when we no longer have anything even for ourselves? I'll tell you what, husband, answered the woman. Early tomorrow morning we will take the children into the forest to where it is the thickest. There we will light a fire for them and give each of them 1 more piece of bread, and then we will go about to our work and leave them alone. They will not find the way home, and we shall be rid of them. No, wife, said the man, I will not do that. How can I bear to leave my children alone in the forest? The wild animals would soon come and tear them into pieces. Oh, you fool, said she. Then we must all four die of hunger. You may as well plan the planks for our coffins. And she left him no peace until he consented. But I feel very sorry for the poor children. All the same, said the man. The two children had also not been able to sleep for hunger and had heard what their stepmother had said to their father. Gretel wept bitter tears and said to Hansel, "Now all is over with us. Be quiet, Gretel," said Hansel. "Do not distress yourself. I will soon find a way to help us." And when the old folks had fallen asleep, he got up, put on his little coat, opened the door below, and crept outside. The moon shone brightly, and the white pebbles which lay in front of the house glittered like real silver pennies. Hansel stopped and stuffed the little pocket of his coat with as many as he could get in. Then he went back and said to Gretel, "Be comforted, little sister, and sleep in peace. God will not forsake us." And he lay down again in his bed. When day dawned, but before the sun had risen, the woman came and awoke the two children, saying, "Get up, you sluggards. We are going into the forest to fetch wood." She gave each a little piece of bread and said, "There is something for your dinner, but do not eat it before then, for you will get nothing else." Gretel took the bread under her apron, as Hansel had the pebbles in his pocket. Then they all set out together on the way to the forest. When they had walked a short time, Hansel stood still and peeped back at the house, and did so again and again. His father said, "Hansel, what are you looking at there and staying behind for? Pay attention and do not forget how to use your legs." "Ah, father," said Hansel, "I'm looking at my little white cat, which is sitting up on the roof and wants to say goodbye to me." The wife said, "Fool, this is not your little cat. This is the morning sun which is shining on the chimneys." Hansel, however, had not been looking back at the cat, but had been constantly throwing one of the white pebble stones out of his pocket on the road. When they had reached the middle of the forest, the father said, "Now, children, pile up some wood, and I will light a fire that you may not be cold." Hansel and Gretel gathered brushwood together as high as a little hill. The brushwood was lighted, and when the flames were burning very high, the woman said, "Now, children, lay yourself down by the fire and rest. We will go into the forest and cut some wood. When we have done, we will come back and fetch you away." Hansel and Gretel sat by the fire, and when no one came, each ate a little piece of bread as they heard the strokes of the wood axe. They believed that their father was near. It was not the axe, however, but a branch which he had fastened to a withered tree which the wind was blowing backwards and forwards. And as they had been sitting such a long time, their eyes closed with fatigue, and they fell fast asleep. When at last they awoke, it was already dark night. Gretel began to cry and said, "How are we to get out of the forest now?" But Hansel comforted her and said, "Just wait a little until the moon has risen." And when the full moon had risen, Hansel took his little sister by the hand and followed the pebbles, which shone like newly coined silver pieces, and showed them the way. They walked the whole night long, and by break of day came once more to their father's house. They knocked at the door, and when the woman opened it and saw that it was Hansel and Gretel, she said, "You naughty children, why have you slept so long in the forest? We thought you were never coming back at all." The father, however, rejoiced, for it had cut him to the heart to leave them behind alone. Not long afterwards, there was once more great death throughout the land, and the children heard that their mothers saying at night to their father, "Everything is eaten again. We have 1/2 loaf left, and that is the end. The children must go. We will take them further into the wood, so that they will not find their way out again. There's no other means of saving ourselves." The man's heart was heavy, and he thought it would be better for you to share the last mouthful with your children. The woman, however, would listen to nothing that he had to say, but scolded him and reapproached him. He who says, I must say be, likewise, and as he had yielded the first time, he had to do so a second time also. The children, however, were still awake and had heard the conversation. When the old folks were asleep, Hansel got up and wanted to go out and pick up pebbles as he had done before, but the woman had locked the door, and Hansel could not get out. Nevertheless, he comforted his little sister and said, Do not cry, Gretel. Go to sleep quietly. The good God will help us. Early in the morning came the woman and took the children out of their beds. Their piece of bread was given to them, but it was still smaller than the time before. On the way into the forest, Hansel crumbled his in his pocket and often stood still and threw a morsel on the ground. Hansel, why do you stop and look around? Said the father. Go on. I'm looking back at my little pigeon, which is sitting on the roof and wants to say goodbye to me, answered Hansel. Fool, said the woman. This is not your little pigeon. This is the morning sun that is shining on the chimney. Hansel, however, little by little, threw all the crumbs on the path. The woman led the children still deeper into the forest, where they had never been in their lives before. Then a great fire was again made, and the mother said, Just sit there, you children, and when you are tired, you may sleep a little. We are going into the forest to cut wood, and in the evening, when we are done, we will come and fetch you away. When it was noon, Gretel shared her piece of bread with Hansel. Then they fell asleep, and evening passed, but no one came to the poor children. They did not awake until it was dark night, and Hansel comforted his little sister and said, Just wait, Gretel, until the moon rises, and then we shall see the crumbs of bread which I have strewn about. They will show us our way home again. When the moon came out, they set out, but they found no crumbs. For the many thousands of birds which fly about in the woods and fields have picked them all. Hansel said to Gretel, We shall soon find the way, but they did not find it. They walked the whole night and all the next day too, from morning till evening, but they did not get out of the forest and were very hungry, for they had nothing to eat but 2 or 3 berries, which grew on the ground, and as they were so weary, their legs would carry them no longer, and lay down beneath a tree and fell asleep. It was now 3 mornings since they had left their father's house. They began to walk again, but they always came deeper into the forest, and if help did not come soon, they must die of hunger and weariness. When it was midday, they saw a beautiful snow-white bird, which sang so delightfully that they stood still and listened to it. And when its song was over, it spread its wings and flew away before them, and they followed it until they reached a little house, on the roof of which it alighted. And when they approached the little house, they saw that it was built of bread and covered with cakes, but that the windows were of clear sugar. We will set to work on that, said Hansel, and have a good meal. I will eat a bit of the roof, and you, Gretel, can eat some of the window. It will taste sweet. Hansel reached up above and broke off a little of the roof to try how it tasted, and Gretel leaned against the window and nibbled at the panes. Then a soft voice cried from the parlor, Nibble, nibble, gnaw, who is nibbling at my little house? The children answered, the wind, the heaven-born wind, and went on eating without disturbing themselves. Hansel, who liked the taste of the roof, tore down a great piece of it, and Gretel pushed out the whole of one round window pane and sat down and enjoyed herself with it. Suddenly the door opened, and a woman as old as the hills, who supported herself on crutches, came creeping out. Hansel and Gretel were so terribly frightened that they let fall what they had in their hands. The old woman, however, nodded her head and said, Oh, you dear children, who has brought you here? Do come in and stay with me. No harm shall happen to you. She took them both by the hand and led them into her little house. The good food was set before them, milk and pancakes with sugar, apples and nuts. Afterwards, the two little beds were covered with clean white linen, and Hansel and Gretel lay down in them and thought they were in heaven. The woman had only pretended to be so kind. She was in reality a wicked witch who lay in wait for children and had only built that little house of bread in order to entice them there. When a child fell into her path, she killed it, cooked and ate it, and that was a feast day for her. Witches have red eyes and cannot see far, but they have a keen scent like a beast, and are aware when human beings draw near. When Hansel and Gretel came into the neighborhood, she laughed with malice and said mockingly, "I will have them, and they shall not escape me again." Early in the morning, before the children were awake, she was already up, and when she saw both of them sleeping and looking so pretty, with their plump and rosy cheeks, she muttered to herself, "That will be a dainty mouthful." Then she seized Hansel with her shriveled hand, carried him into a little stable, and locked him in behind a grated door. Scream as he might, it would not help him. Then she went to Gretel, shook her till she woke, and cried, "Get up, lazy thing, fetch some water, and cook something good for your brother. He's in the stable outside, and is to be made fat. And when he is fat, I will eat him." Gretel began to weep bitterly, but it was all in vain, for she was forced to do what the wicked witch commanded. And now the best food was cooked for the poor Hansel, but Gretel got nothing but crab shells. Every morning the woman crept to the little stable and cried, "Hansel, stretch out your little fingers that I might feel if you will soon be fat." Hansel, however, stretched out a little bone to her, and the old woman, who had dim eyes, could not see it, and thought it was Hansel's fingers, and was astonished that there was no way of fattening him. When 4 weeks had gone by, and Hansel still remained thin, she was seized with impatience, and would not wait any longer. "Now then, Gretel," she cried to the girl, "stir yourself and bring some water. Let Hansel be fat or lean, tomorrow I will kill him and cook him." Ah, how the poor little sister did lament when she had to fetch the water, and how her tears did flow down her cheeks. "Dear God, do help us," she cried. "If the wild beasts in the forest had but devoured us, we should at any rate have died together. Just keep your noise to yourself," said the old woman. "It won't help you at all." Early in the morning, Gretel had to go out and hang up the cauldron with the water and light the fire. "We will bake first," said the old woman. "I have already heated the oven and kneaded the dough." She pushed poor Gretel out to the oven, from which flames of fire were already darting. "Creep in," said the witch, "and see if it is properly heated, so that we can put the bread in." And once Gretel was inside, she intended to shut the oven and let her bake in it, and then she would eat her too. But Gretel saw that she had in her mind, and said, "I do not know how I am to do it. How do I get in?" "Silly girl," said the old woman. "The door is big enough. Just look, I can get in myself." She creeped in and thrust her head into the oven. Then Gretel gave her a push that drove her far into it, and shut the iron door and fastened the bolt. Oh, then she began to howl quite horribly. But Gretel ran away, and the godless witch was miserably burned to death. Gretel, however, ran like lightning to Hansel, opened his little stable, and cried, "Hansel, we are saved now. The old witch is dead." Then Hansel sprang like a bird from its cage when the door is opened. How they did rejoice and embrace each other, and dance about and kiss each other. And as they had no longer any need to fear her, they went into the witch's house, and in every corner there stood chests full of pearls and jewels. "These are far better than pebbles," said Hansel, and thrust into his pocket whatever could be got in. And Gretel said, I too will take something home with me, and fill her pocketful as well. But now we must be off, said Hansel, that we may get out of the witch's forest. When they had walked for 2 hours, they came to a great stretch of water. We cannot cross, said Hansel. I see no footplank and no bridge. And there's also no ferry, answered Gretel, but a white duck is swimming there. If I ask her, she will help us over. Little duck, dost thou see? Hansel and Gretel are waiting for thee. There's never a plank or bridge in sight. Take us across and thy back so wide. The duck came to them, and Hansel seated himself on his back and told his sister to sit by him. No, replied Gretel, this will be too heavy for the little duck. She will take us across one after the other. The good little duck did so, and when they were once across safely, and had walked for a short time, the forest seemed to be more and more familiar to them, and at length they saw from afar their father's house. Then they began to run, rushed into the parlor, and threw themselves round their father's neck. The man had not known one happy hour since he had left the children in the forest. The woman, however, was dead. Gretel emptied her pocket until pearls and precious stones ran about the room, and Hansel threw one handful after another out of his pocket too, to add to them. Then all anxiety was at an end, and they lived together in perfect happiness. The Devil with the 3 Golden Hairs, a fairy tale by Brothers Grimm. There was once a poor woman who gave birth to a little son, and as he came into the world with a cowl on, it was predicted that in his 14th year he would have the king's daughter for his wife. It happened that soon afterwards the king came into the village, and no one knew that he was a king. And when he asked the people what news there was, they answered, the child has just been born with a cowl on. Whatever anyone so born undertakes turns out well. It is prophesied, too, that in his 14th year he will have the king's daughter for his wife. The king, who had a bad heart and was angry by the prophecy, went to the parents and, seemingly quite friendly, said, You poor people, let me have your child and I will take good care of it. At first they refused, but when the stranger offered them a large amount of gold for it, and they thought it is a child of good fortune and everything must turn out well for it, they at last consented and gave him the child. The king put it in a box and rode away until he came to a deep piece of water. Then he threw the box into it and thought, I have freed my daughter from her undesired suitor. The box, however, did not sink but floated like a boat, and not a drop of water made its way into it, and it floated to within 2 miles of the king's chief city, where there was a mill, and it came to a halt at the mill's dam. A miller's boy who, by good luck, was standing there and noticed it and pulled it out with a hook, thinking that he had found a great treasure. But when he opened it, there lay a pretty boy inside, quite fresh and lively. He took him to the miller and his wife, and as they had no children, they were glad and said, God has given him to us. They took great care of the foundling, and he grew up in all goodness. It happened that once in a storm, the king went into the mill and asked the mill folk if the tall youth were their son. No, answered they, he's a foundling. 14 years ago he floated down to the mill dam in a box, and the mill boy pulled him out of the water. Then the king knew that it was none other than the child of good fortune, which he had thrown into the water, and he said, My good people, could not the youth take a letter to the queen? I will give him 2 pieces of gold as a reward, just as the king commands, answered they, and they told the boy to hold himself in readiness. Then the king wrote a letter to the queen, wherein he said, As soon as the boy arrives with this letter, let him be killed and buried, and all must be done before I come home. The boy set out with this letter, but he lost his way, and in the evening came to a large forest. In the darkness he saw a small light. He went towards it and reached a cottage. When he went in, an old woman was sitting by the fire quite alone. She started when she saw the boy and said, "Whence do you come, and whither are you going?" "I come from the mill," he answered. "I wish to go to the queen, to whom I'm taking a letter. But as I have lost my way into the forest, I should like to stay here overnight." "You poor boy," said the woman. "You have come into a den of thieves, and when they come home they will kill you." "Let them come," said the boy. "I'm not afraid, but I'm so tired that I cannot go any further." And he stretched himself upon a bench and fell asleep. Soon afterwards the robbers came, and angrily asked what strange boy was lying there. "Ah," said the old woman, "it is an innocent child who has lost himself in the forest, and out of pity I have let him come in. He has to take a letter to the queen." The robbers opened the letter and read it. In it was written that the boy, as soon as he arrives, should be put to death. Then the hard-hearted robbers felt pity, and their leader tore up the letter and wrote another, saying that as soon as the boy came, he should be married at once to the king's daughter. Then they let him lie quietly on the bench until the next morning, and when he woke, they gave him the letter and showed him the right way. And the queen, when she had received the letter and read it, did as was written in it, and had a splendid wedding feast prepared, and the king's daughter was married to the child of good fortune. And as the youth was handsome and friendly, she lived with him in joy and contentment. After some time the king returned to his palace and saw that the prophecy was fulfilled, and the child married to his daughter. "How has that come to pass?" said he. "I have quite another order in my letter." So the queen gave him the letter, and said that he might see for himself what was written in it. The king read the letter and saw quite well that it had been exchanged for another. He asked the youth what had become of the letter entrusted to him, and why he had brought another one instead of it. "I know nothing about it," answered he. "It must have been changed in the night when I slept in the forest." The king said in a passion, "You shall not have everything quite so much your own way. Whosoever marries my daughter must fetch me from hell 3 golden hairs from the head of the devil himself. Bring me what I want, and you shall keep my daughter." In this way the king hoped to be rid of him forever. But the child of good fortune answered, "I will fetch the golden hairs. I'm not afraid of the devil." Whereupon he took leave of them and began his journey. The road led him to a large town, where the watchman by the gates asked him what his trade was and what he knew. "I know everything," answered the child of good fortune. "Then you can do us a favor," said the watchman. "If you tell us why our market fountain, which once flowed with wine, has become dry and no longer gives even water." "That you shall know," answered he. "Only wait until I come back." Then he went further and came to another town, and there was also a gatekeeper asked him what was his trade and what he knew. "I know everything," answered he. "Then you can do us a favor and tell us why a tree in our town, which once bore golden apples and now does not even put forth leaves." "You shall know that," answered he. "Only wait until I come back." Then he went on and came to a wide river, for which he must cross. The ferryman asked him what his trade was and what he knew. "I know everything," answered he. "Then you can do me a favor," said the ferryman, "and tell me why I must always be rowing backwards and forwards, and am never set free." "You shall know that," answered he. "Only wait until I come back." And when he had crossed the water, he found the entrance to hell. It was black and soddy within, and the devil was not at home, but his grandmother was sitting in a large armchair. "What do you want?" said she to him. But she did not look so very wicked. "I should like to have 3 golden hairs from the devil's head," answered he, "else I cannot keep my wife." "This is a good deal to ask for," said she. "If the devil comes and finds you, it will cost you your life. But as I pity you, I will see if I can help you." She changed him into an aunt and said, "Creep into the folds of my dress. You will be safe there." "Yes," answered he. "So far, so good. But there are 3 things beside that I want to know. Why a fountain which once flowed with wine had become dry, and no longer even gives water. Why a tree which once bore golden apples does not even put forth leaves. And why a ferryman must always be going backwards and forwards, and is never set free. Those are difficult questions, answered she. But just be silent, quiet, and pay attention to what the devil says when I pull out the 3 golden hairs. As the evening came on, the devil returned home. No sooner had he entered than he noticed that the air was not pure. I smell men's flesh, said he. All is not right here. Then he looked into every corner and searched, but could not find anything. His grandmother scolded him. It has just been swept, said she, and everything put in order, and now you're upsetting it again, and have always got men's flesh in your nose. Sit down and eat your supper. When he had eaten and drunk, he was tired, and laid his head in his grandmother's lap, and told her she should louse him a little. It was not long before he was fast asleep, snoring and breathing heavily. And the old woman took a hold of her golden hair, pulled it out, and laid it down beside her. Oh, cried the devil, what are you doing? I've had a bad dream, answered the grandmother, so I seized hold of your hair. What did you dream then? Said the devil. I dreamed that in a marketplace from which wine once flowed was dried up. Not even water would flow out of it. What is the cause of it? Oh, if they did but know it, answered the devil. There is a toad sitting under a stone in the wall. If they killed it, the wine would flow again. The grandmother loused him again until he went back to sleep and snored so that the windows even shook. Then she pulled out the second hair. Ah, what are you doing? Cried the devil angrily. Do not take it all, said she. I did it in a dream. What have you dreamt this time? Asked he. I dreamt that in a certain kingdom there stood an apple tree which once bore golden apples, but now would not even bear leaves. What think you was the reason? Oh, if they did but know, answered the devil. A mouse is gnawing at the root. If they killed it, they would have golden apples again. But if it gnaws much longer, the tree will wither altogether. But I have had enough of your dreams. If you disturb me in my sleep again, you will get a box on the ear. The grandmother spoke gently to him and picked his slice once more until he fell asleep and snored. Then she took hold of the 3rd golden hair and pulled it out. The devil jumped up, roared out, and would have treated her ill if she had not quieted him again and said, Who can help bad dreams? What was the dream then? Asked he, and was quite curious. I dreamt of a ferryman who complained that he must always ferry from one side to another and was never released. What is the cause of it? Ah, the fool, answered the devil. When anyone comes and wants to go across, he must put the oar in his hand, and the other man will have to ferry, and he will be free. As the grandmother had plucked out the 3 golden hairs, and the 3 questions were answered, she let the old devil alone, and he slept until daybreak. When the devil had gone out again, the old woman took the ant out of the folds of her dress, and gave the child of good fortune his human shape again. They are the 3 golden hairs for you, said she. What the devil said to you, 3 questions. I suppose you heard. Yes, answered he. I heard, and will take care to remember. You have what you want, said she, and now you can go your way. He thanked the old woman for helping him in his need, and left hell when content that everything had turned out so fortunately. When he came to the ferryman, he was expected to give the promised answer. Ferry me across first, said the child of good fortune, and then I will tell you how you can be set free. And when he reached the opposite shore, he gave him the devil's advice. Next time when anyone comes who wants to be ferried over, just put the oar in his hand. He went on and came to the town wherein stood the unfruitful tree. There too the watchman wanted the answer. So he told him what he had heard from the devil. Kill the mouse, which is gnawing at its roots, and it will bear golden apples again. Then the watchman thanked him and gave him as reward 2 asses laden with gold, which followed him. Finally, he came to the town whose well was dry. He told the watchman what the devil had said. A toad is in the well, beneath a stone. You must find it and kill it, and the well will again give wine in plenty. The watchman thanked him and also gave him 2 asses laden with gold. At last, the child of good fortune got home to his wife, who was heartily glad to see him again and to hear how well he had prospered in everything. To the king he took what he asked for, the devil's 3 golden hairs, and when the king saw the pile of gold he brought with him, he was quite content and said, "Now all the conditions are fulfilled. You can keep my daughter. But tell me, dear son-in-law, where did you get that all gold from? This is tremendous wealth. I was rowed across the river," answered he. "It lies on the shore instead of sand. Can I too fetch some of it?" said the king, and he was quite eager about it. "As much as you like," answered he. "There's a ferryman on the river. Let him ferry you over, and you can fill your sacks on the other side." The greedy king set out in all haste, and when he came to the river, he beckoned to the ferryman and put him across. The ferryman came and bade him get in, and when they got to the other side of the shore, he put the oar in his hand and sprang over. But from this time forth, the king had to ferry as a punishment for his sins. Perhaps he is still ferrying. If he is, it is because no one has taken the oar from him. Like the video and comment down below if you enjoyed it, and subscribe my channel to support me.